Investor Connect podcast program. This is Hall T. Martin. I'm the host of the show, in which we interview angel investors, venture capital, private equity, family offices, and many other investor groups for startups and growth companies. I hope you enjoy this episode. Thank you for joining us. Hello, this is Hall Martin with Investor Connect. Today we're here with Pedro Anderson of Winding Tree. Pedro, thank you for joining us.
Hi, Hall. Thank you for having me, and really excited.
Let's dive right into it. So can you tell us a little bit about your background and what you did before you got into the position you're in now?
Sure. So I come from a background in social entrepreneurship, in working with underprivileged youth in getting them careers in hospitality, and quite a bit of time in software sales in event space. And finally came to where we're at now, where it's a kind of a blend of the two. The social entrepreneurship side, the philanthropic side mixed with the technology side. So really excited.
Great. So you're currently running Winding Tree. Can you tell us more about that project and what it's all about?
Winding Tree is a decentralized distribution platform for the travel industry. So what it allows airlines and hotels to do is list their inventory and make it available to travel agents without having to hand over ownership to an intermediary or pay the high fees associated with working with an intermediary today. But the main problem that we're trying to solve is not just lowering the fees, which is great, and it's definitely what gets folks the attention of in the industry. But the main motivation is really more about facilitating innovation in this industry, which is sorely lacking an open medium or platform for that.
That's great. Well, I understand you recently raised funding for Winding Tree, and a lot of our listeners are actually starting to raise funding for their blockchain application. And maybe you can tell us a little bit about your experience and how that went.
You're speaking about the ICO that we ran back in February, right?
That's right.
Yeah, so we, from the beginning, when we set off to do this, I remembered I had been hearing from one of my co-founders and a good friend, known him for a long time. He had been working in travel while I was working in the event technology space, right? And he had been telling me of the horrors of working as a startup in the travel space, how hard it is to get any progress, even if you have good tech. And he was speaking from experience. He had been through Y Combinator, which is probably one of the best validations you can get for a startup. And he was still amazed at how challenging it was to get traction, not because of the industry didn't want it, but because of the inefficiencies, right? And he was telling me about this idea to create a marketplace in the middle that would replace the current intermediaries, right? A distribution platform. And my question was, well, what would stop us from becoming the intermediaries, to hiking up the fees, eventually slowing down our technology standards? Because once you have a comfortable position, that is the inevitable end, right? And that's when blockchain came into the picture. So when we came to the subject of blockchain, it wasn't about, this was before the crypto hype. It was before ICO mania, all of that. And it was more about finding a way to create a platform that was monopoly proof. And this was an opportunity to do that. If we were to try to do what we're doing now, 10 years ago, it would not have been possible, because we would have had too much power as a middle piece in the industry to be able to flip the switch and start hiking fees later on, take ownership of everything, and just kind of monopolize the space ourselves, right? So it required a ton of trust from the industry, from suppliers to trust us with their inventory. It would have given us a lot of power that, even if we didn't want to do anything wrong, would make us vulnerable to outside attacks and so on, right? So long story short, it was all about decentralization and removing that power to manipulate markets and make us monopoly proof. So when we set about to create the project, we published a manifesto in the end of 2016. We got over 1,000 responses from industry people saying, hey, we want to help make this happen. How can we help? And we saw that there was a lot of community support. And at the time, we were talking to VCs, and they didn't seem to understand the token model, the opportunities that decentralization allows, right? And what I mean by the token model is a model whereby a project can be funded on a nonprofit basis for the sake of solving a problem in an industry without extraction of rent or any extractive models whatsoever, right? And more specifically, so VCs wanted to be able to say, okay, yeah, that's great that you guys start off this way, but eventually you want to charge a percentage, right? We have to have that ability. And so we decided at that point we didn't want to work with any traditional investors, not that we didn't have enough options, but mainly because of that extraction point. We would never, we weren't promising any future revenue. This was a project to solve a problem in an industry, similar to the way that the internet was created, right? A scientific project to solve a problem. And take on any VC funding. We never had to give any early backers any kind of special promises, privileges, advantages, control, or bonuses. We just started working on the project. We bootstrapped the beginning and then made the project available to the public to contribute via pre-sale first in November and then the ICO itself in February. And we were able to raise, at the time, $16 million from the community without ever giving anything away in terms of privileges and so on, like I described. And I think it was one of the only projects like this. Most projects to date, they tend to give a lot of high incentives to early backers, but then for later on, it's not as advantageous, right? Whether through VC funding or whether through really high bonuses for early backers, right?
Right. So when you built that ICO, what was the first thing you did to lay the foundation of the groundwork for building the application and getting ready for the token raise? What were you doing first?
So we had the advantage of having 4 founders, 3 of which are they're full stack developers who much experience in the space, both in travel and in blockchain space. So we started working on both things up front. Some of us were focused on building support within the industry. So we published the manifesto. We were going on a roadshow, visiting travel companies, finding what kind of support, how they wanted to work with us, while others were working on the token itself, developing the token that would be used on the platform for the smart contracts. We're built on Ethereum, and the token is called Lift token. So we were working on the development of the Lift token, as well as building out a version of the product that would run entirely on the Ethereum network, which sounds crazy because the inefficiencies of working on Ethereum, the cost and the speed challenges. And so we were working on building that out. We were working on the partnership front and talking to the actual industry, both technology partners as well as suppliers, airlines and hotels that might want to use the platform. And we focused on those first. So this was also a little different than traditional ICOs. Usually projects will focus more on the crypto community and do a lot of crypto-focused activities. And there's a lot of show fare that goes into that, right? Theatrics and so on. We were more focused on the travel industry itself, which may or may not have been a good thing. I think if we wanted to raise more money, we would have probably invested more in crypto community, but we were looking for the funding that we needed for the project to get it done, right? And by focusing on the travel industry, we were able to get some very solid partners early on, like Lufthansa Group, which is the largest airline group in Europe, and Nordic Choice Hotels, which gave validation for the project, both for the travel industry as well as the crypto community, seeing that this wasn't a big promises white paper that could have been summarized in a tweet type of deal. It was, we're here for the long term. We want to build this platform out. And then just leading up to the ICO, we finally started participating more in the crypto community and attending more events there, speaking to those audiences, participating more in the shows and videos and podcasts for that community. But that was the journey. I hope that answers your question.
Well, sure. I think it does. And I think a lot of the confusion comes with a lot of the startups in the blockchain space are building tools for the crypto community. They're building wallets, they're building exchanges, and so they go straight to the crypto community because they're both the users and the technical foundation. But if you're not building for that community, I think you're right. You have to go out to the community you're going to ultimately serve and sign them up as partners and users for your platform, get feedback for what you're doing, and then build something that hopefully they'll actually sign up and use. I hear a lot of talk from those who build ICOs about building their community. From day one, you're thinking about who's going to use it, who's going to develop on it, and also who's going to invest in it. And you're starting to build that network. So it sounds like you guys did a very good job in engage travel industry for your network, because it sounds like you had a very good launch there. Once you had that information, what did you do next as far as building white papers or building MVPs of the tool? What came next?
So we started very early with publishing the white paper. And we were originally, the model that we had for the ICO was going to be a Dutch auction, which is the same model that Google used, for example, with their IPO, not to be confused with ICOs. And we were looking at possibly doing a Dutch auction, as that would allow for everybody to participate. It would remove the challenges of over-centralization that a lot of the ICOs were facing. But then right around the time that we had kind of written that in, I think it was Gnosis. I don't recall exactly which project it was. I think it was Gnosis. They ran their ICO, but they ran into some issues with that model right then. And we were able to pivot early on and say, wait, that's not what's going to work. And at the time, Vitalik posted a brilliant article about the current challenges with ICOs. This was back then, I think it was May or June. And with some suggestions for ICO models that added more validation, right? So we took one of the ideas that he had proposed in there, changed it a little bit, optimized it for what we were trying to do, and we called it the market validation mechanism. He used the word validation to, what that meant was that instead of, hey, we raised X amount, we have access to it, and now we go and spend it, you would create a soft cap. In our case, it was 10 million. Anything over which would go into a smart contract, which those who participated in the ICO could then send their tokens to if they stopped believing in the project or in some way wanted to back out. And they would receive part of their Ether back, or the cryptocurrency they used to participate in the ICO, right? So this adds validation in that over the course of 2 years, there's still some funding in there that they can get a partial refund, so to speak, but it lessens over time, because over the course of 2 years, those funds are then released to the foundation. As the foundation shows that they're making progress, shows validation, then it gives less and less of a refund, right? Whereas right after the ICO, folks could go and send their tokens to that smart contract. So I think we were the first one to do that. A few other projects have done it since. And I think it's a very good model. It worked out well. As far as the actual platform development, we did build out the platform fully on Ethereum first, the sample or simplified version of it. And yes, it was way too slow, way too costly to do. As you can imagine, in travel, there are billions of transactions that would need to take place. So naturally, it wouldn't work, but it was more to experiment and find what did work, right? Because what I find is a lot of people say, yeah, we're going to do a centralized version of the project now, and then someday we'll decentralize it. And you're kind of like, okay, well, at which point? Is that before users get on? Is that before what happens to me as an investor, right? So that model, I'm always kind of weary of, because anybody can say that eventually they'll change, right? Like, well, I'm going to start off by controlling everything, but eventually I'll just hand over that power, right? So we wanted to find what can we keep completely decentralized, but then get the optimization that traditional systems have, right? Because blockchain at the end of the day is the most inefficient database in the world, really. It's just a really inefficient database. And in exchange for that inefficiency, we get the removal of need for trust. We get the level of security that we enjoy, and that peer-to-peer system that removes the need for trust in third parties, right? And so that was the main reason we started out on this. It wasn't about payments. It wasn't about a new way to raise funds. It was about decentralization. So we found that the ownership of the content worked very well on the blockchain, but the actual content itself did not necessarily need to be on blockchain. What I mean by that is, let's say you're listing a hotel, the actual information about the rooms, the actual images, and so on, those don't necessarily need to be on chain, right? That would take up too much. And so we started working on an architecture proposal, which we published at the beginning of this year. And that was a result of the experiments that we ran by running a project completely on chain. And with that new proposed architecture, we managed to maintain complete decentralization while increasing the speed by putting some of the content on Swarm and IPFS, right? That's a little bit about the process that we went through as far as the development and changes to, say, the white paper and the model that we had in place.
So that's always a good point. I always wondered, does everything need to be on blockchain? If I buy a house, I'd love it to be on blockchain because I need the trust and all the benefits that go with it. If I buy a pack of chewing gum, do I really care if that's on the blockchain? Maybe just a simple database, a centralized would be good enough. And so I think there's that teasing out part of what portion needs to be truly trustless and on the blockchain and what does not. And of course, you can get a lot more efficiency on centralized systems, but if you don't need all the extra ability that goes with it. And I think a lot of companies
are looking for that dividing line as to how to figure that out in order to optimize the system. Everything's on the blockchain, it's too slow. Everything's not on the blockchain, you don't have any trust in. So there's a hybrid system that seemed like it's coming into place. And so I guess you came to that through just trial and error, or was there some other way that you figured that out?
No, it came through trial and error. Of course, we look a lot at what other projects are doing. Like I told you before, we were participating in a lot of travel events, but we also participate in projects in the blockchain development community, not so much the crypto community in the sense of speculation, but the developer community. So we participate in hackathons within the Ethereum community. We were down in East Buenos Aires. This week we're in East Berlin. And we'll be hosting our own hackathon together with Status, which is a fairly successful project that's trying to bring crypto to the masses and make it real simple to use to where all of our friends that aren't tech savvy could use. And so by working with all these other projects, we learn a lot from what others are doing, what worked, what didn't work. But yeah, a lot of it came from our own experience trying to build this simplified version. And a lot of it came from other projects and what they were doing. But what I found in general is that there's a lot of, okay, it's hard to do decentralized, let's do a centralized version for two reasons. I think one, technically, the challenge is there. And then two, because people want to kind of keep control, right? Like, so in the recent Deloitte report on blockchain, they were saying that they surveyed, I think it was the top 500 executives from the Fortune 500, and 70% of them claim to be blockchain experts or at least not fairly knowledgeable in it, right? But then when it was showing the advantages that they see for blockchain, it was saying speed. And then when it was looking at how they were looking to use blockchain, permission blockchain was the highest voted version of blockchain that they wanted to use, right? Which to me didn't really make any sense. First of all, the speed is not the greatest advantage to blockchain. It's probably the number one problem with blockchain. And then the fact that they were all looking at permission blockchain kind of shows that there's this, hey, it's too hard to work with decentralization, but we want to catch on to the hype. We want to catch on to the branding and the label that blockchain has right now. I've got to get behind it, right? So it's a challenge for sure, yeah.
Sure. So let's talk about your ICO. What did you do to prepare for the actual fundraise itself for the tokens that you put out there? What were the mechanics behind it? How many people ended up putting in money for the tokens, and how did you manage the campaigning part of that?
We had over 8,000 participants in the ICO, a lot of them from the travel community. So that was really helpful to have people from the industry that understand what we're doing. And as far as the campaign, if you would, the biggest criticism we received from third-party channels, podcasters that were looking at our project without actually communicating with us or lightly reaching out and just kind of giving their own review of our project, the number one criticism we received was these guys are under-marketed, which is funny because you know how the blockchain world, the ICO world is very, very hype, very explosive, especially towards the end of 2017, early 2018. It was roller coaster ride, right? And the number one criticism we received was, oh, these guys are under-marketed. They're not putting enough into promoting the hype around the project. And that kind of was our approach in general. It was more scientific. We want to work on developing the code. We want to work on developing the platform. So from the beginning, we had all of our code publicly available. Anybody could go and check it out to this day. The funding, everything was very, very transparent from the beginning. And I think that helped a lot in gaining the support that led to the funding that we got from the partners that came on board, and then also from community members that we had a lot of invites to speak that were unpaid. We had a lot of articles written about the project that were unpaid. But as far as actual investment into it, mostly crypto events, and then the PR firm that we used to help us with relating with the media, because after we started getting partners on board, there was a lot of attention. But I would say that if it was one thing that we could have done more of, it would have been marketing naturally, but I'm not sure if that would have been better or worse. Might have been better for funding, right? But what I did notice is when folks are talking about blockchain projects and investing in ICOs, and I have friends that are VCs, and they're very, very, hard to say, disciplined in the way that they invest in traditional projects. But when they're looking at ICOs, it's almost like everyone gets empowered to take big risks. It's an interesting thing. Like, they'll invest in projects that they don't fully understand or that seem like they're going to be a good bet. But in the crypto space, the marketing for an ICO is different than a traditional marketing for a project. Marketing for an ICO is pay to play, even more so than in traditional business, right? And you can buy out endorsements, you can buy out reviews, you can buy out pretty much anything in the space besides actual code, smart contract audits, which we did with CoinFabric, and there are a few reputable ones, but pretty much anything else you can buy out whether it's legitimate or not. So it's very hard to tell the potential of a project purely on its marketing potential. And I think that in the future of ICOs, there's going to be a lot more checking of code and checking of actual business models rather than just going based on the hype or the numbers that are shown in a white paper, right?
Well, a lot of the buyers of ICO were actually speculators. They were not actual users of the token for the stated purpose. They were taking them and putting them on exchange and selling them for a gain at some point in the process. And when that became too exuberant, the SEC came in and shut that down and just declared everything as security to put it back under them. So that's the thing I was curious about, is how many of your 8,000 users or 8,000 purchasers of the token are users that were actually buying it because I want to use the service you guys are providing, versus was there any speculation going on in there?
So the platform is B2B. It's not something that you would just use up front. It was more of belief in what we're changing and solving this problem in the industry. So we had a lot of high-ranking people from the travel industry, people from public major companies that supported what we're doing and wanted to make sure this happened and move forward, that threw money into making this a possibility, right? So I think of the nature of the contributions were more of investment in a scientific change that they wanted to see, similar to the way that one would invest or donate to anti-aging science, right? So the contributions towards the project were more of that nature. But yeah, there are certainly folks in the space that wanted to use the tokens as soon as possible on travel itself. And to that end, we actually, for the hackathon we're participating in Berlin right now, we created it's not our core product, it was more just to show what can be done with the platform. We created a booking app that allowed for participants in the hackathon to book their hotel room using the Lyft token and they would get a significant discount because they wouldn't have to go through all the rigmarole that we'd have to go through with the traditional system right now, right? And it was a fun project to do, to show what could be done, what others could be doing, other developers and startups could be building tools onto it. But it was also a way to show that, yeah, if you wanted to, you could spend it on something like that if it were built in. But it's not the major focus right now. B2C is definitely not our market. Our market is making that connection between businesses.
Well, it sounds like you had a lot of industry support, and that was a key factor I don't see in a lot of ICOs, where you get the industry leaders to back it and support it with their marketing and their use of it and all the other things that go along with it. And it sounds like they actually invested some money into it as well through the tokens to just be a part of it and support the effort that you had going on there. So it sounds like that was a key factor in there as well. How long were you actually running the campaign? Was this a 30, 60, 90-day campaign, or was it much longer?
So prior to November, there was almost nothing done as far as promotion of the presale or the ICO. It was purely travel community. So speaking at travel conferences, publishing articles in T News, which is and Skift, which are industry newspapers. And immediately after the presale, we started to do a little bit more promotion. So I would say from November to February is when we promoted the ICO itself. Prior to November, it was mostly just the travel industry and trying to get support within the industry, right?
Okay. Well, for those who are just now building out their ICO and getting ready to go down this path that you went down, what would be your words of advice to them about getting going on it? What should they be thinking first, second, and third?
I would say that I wouldn't get caught up in the fever of trying to rush. I think that the ICO market is maturing, and as that happens, there will be a lot more long-term looking into projects instead of kind of the pump and dump hype right now, and focus on building out test pilot or some version of the product, at least a minimum viable product, which I think should be expected of all projects, not just a paper. And then also working out the legalities. I don't think that it's just about which place lets you do an ICO, but about the long-term negotiations that you would have to do. Most blockchain projects are not, well, I wouldn't say most. A lot of blockchain projects aren't necessarily B2C, or regardless of what type of business they are, there will be agreements that will have to be made, and your jurisdiction definitely makes a difference to have a more reputable location. And I think we did well in focusing in Europe, where a lot of our partnerships tend to be. It was very beneficial to working with European companies. And yeah, so focus on that, not get caught up in the hype to rush things, but do things thoroughly, slow down to build out the community, but also to build out the product. I think MVP is a must for any projects moving forward. And then the jurisdiction and legalities to get those right and not try to fit your project into a box. There was a lot of people trying to build projects that were clearly securities, for example, and trying to say it's a utility. No, if it's a security, just work out the legalities and try to figure it out within your jurisdiction, how to do that. If it's a utility, it will be self-evident, right? But this whole trying to squeeze it into a certain box and try to push it forward anyways, I think those days are past.
I agree. I think the SEC has made clear about how that's going to work for a while anyway. But that's great advice, and looking forward to seeing you at the upcoming conference we have in Boston on ICOs, and love to hear you share your experience with other people that are in there as well. In the last few minutes that we have, is there anything else we should cover that we haven't?
No, that'd be all. Excited to be going to a Texan event. This is really great. I live here in Texas, so it was great to see more tech here.
That's great. That's great. So how best for the audience to get back in touch with you?
Through windingtree.com. Come check out our site. We have a hackathon coming up. If you have a tech team that would like to join, we're still taking applications. We have a number of airlines and hotels participating. That'll be a great chance to meet the team and check out the code. Otherwise, yeah, through our website, all of our codes listed on there, partners, contact info, events that we're going to be speaking at. Yeah, I would love to hear from you.
Well, that's great. We'll put that in the show notes so people can get back in touch with you. And I want to thank you for taking time to join us today and hope to have you back for a follow-up soon.
All right. Thank you.
Investor Connect helps investors interested in startup funding. In this podcast series, experienced investors share their experience and advice. You can learn more at investorconnect.org. Paul T. Martin is the director of Investor Connect, which is a 501c3 nonprofit dedicated to the education of investors for early-stage funding. All opinions expressed by Hall and podcast guests are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinion of Investor Connect. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon as a basis for investment decisions.